Welcome to Registered, the podcast of the Catholic Register, where we'll be taking a look at the stories that graced all of our platforms over the past week. I'm Mickey Conlon, editor of the Register, alongside reporters Luke Mandato and Quinton Amundson. Welcome, guys.
Mickey, thanks for having us on again.
It's great to be here as always.
All right, thanks, guys. And this week's episode is brought to you by EWTN, the world's largest religious media network. EWTN is offering free ebooks on the lives of our newest saints, St. Carlo Acutis and St. Per Giorgio Frassati. You can download the free ebooks through EWTN.com. You can also watch powerful documentaries about their lives on EWTN On Demand or through the free EWTN app. And yes, very nice to welcome our friends at EWTN who will be sponsoring us today and in the future. It's beautiful to welcome them. So, in the news this week, we have got so much. And one of the issues, homelessness, which I don't think there's anyone in Canada that doesn't see it nowadays. It is something that was pretty well hidden for years and years and years, but now it is just so out in the open. And what really struck the headlines this week is the city of Barrie, Ontario, north of Toronto. They've declared a homeless state of emergency, and the mayor, Alex Nuttall, I hope that's his name. I haven't butchered it. But he has declared a state of emergency, and the tent encampments that are dotting the city are being cleaned up. Well, there's not everyone who's happy about that. And Luke, you spoke this week to Father Larry Leger from St. Mary's Parish up in Barrie. Why don't you give us an idea of why he's unhappy with the mayor's move?
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks for the intro, Mickey. Yes, it was a very eye-opening conversation I had with Father Larry, of course, pastor of St. Mary's Parish up there in Barrie. And I'll tell you, Mickey, he really was not holding back on his thoughts about what's been going on in his city there. Of course, you talked about it briefly there, sort of this recent crackdown on the encampments that have been popping up throughout the city. There's a couple issues with those in the past that I'm sure we'll get into a bit later on, but the state of emergency was declared. It was to address a sort of lawlessness in public spaces like parks, boulevards, local streets, and of course with those tent cities popping up everywhere. Again, Father Larry told me that he felt the city was sort of pointing the finger at the homeless for being responsible for this instead of looking at some of the other issues like affordable housing, mental health problems, drug addictions, things of that sort. And again, I don't think he really wanted to come off as pointing the finger. It may have seemed that way. He was very passionate when speaking to me. And I think this is just a man with a great love of Catholic social teaching and someone just really on fire for helping out, people down on their luck. And so that passion maybe comes across as being upset. He was very level-headed when we spoke. He said some great things about the mayor as well. Of course, they're going to be trying to offer as much support as they can to the people in these encampments and the people facing homelessness in the city. But the biggest thing for him was a lack of affordable housing. He said for the last 30 years, federal and provincial governments just haven't built enough truly affordable housing, which is causing some of the rise in the population of these encampments. For example, he says there's a couple loopholes in affordable housing that just aren't working. The delivery system is just not working. So, for example, a studio apartment being sold for rent at $1,800 a month could be labeled as affordable because it's cheaper than the market rent, which is already peaking at over $2,000 in Barrie. So while that may look like affordable housing on the surface, he's talking to me and he's saying for people on the streets, this is the last thing from affordable, right? And that goes back to what we're seeing in the population and the rise in these tent cities. So it was very interesting.
Look at guys like us who are fully employed. I certainly wouldn't want to be paying $1,800 a month in rent.
Right, and we have it pretty good. We have it pretty good. So, as I was saying, yes, just a very interesting conversation. And of course, the state of emergency goes back. There was a tragic incident last year at a Victoria Street encampment in Barrie. Two men were murdered, and they believe that the alleged person had lived in the same encampment. This brought a lot of media attention to the encampments within Barrie. There was a lot of eyes on it after that incident. And I can't say for sure, but I would like to imagine that may have prompted the city to really start cracking down on this. And we're seeing the result of that now.
Well, I would think, well, not that murder's a good thing, but it brought some attention to this, and now possibly something will be done. And we know how governments work. Once one does something, the others are quick to follow. Perhaps Quinton, you could tell us, you being our man in Calgary, you've obviously seen homelessness on the streets out there. What's happening out west over the homelessness issue?
I think it's going to be a pretty big discussion point in the upcoming municipal election a little later this fall. I know that there are definitely a lot of concerns about, like the drug use, like homeless in open spaces, that that there's more of a presence on those public-facing platforms like, C-train stations and outside of malls. And I do get a sense that there's going to be a lot of candidates that are going to be very animated to talk about it. Because, you look at the tourism that happens every year, there is a big spotlight on Calgary, particularly during the summer with the Calgary Stampede. And you do get a sense that it was very noticeable, more so than usual, from the hundreds of thousands of people that came into this city to experience the revelries. And of course, you don't always spend your time at the Stampede grounds. You want to tour a lot around the city, because Calgary is a very beautiful city. I love living here. And you definitely get a sense that people are no longer able to kind of ignore or just kind of downplay this. So I'm very interested to seeing how the mayoral candidates are going to be talking about this leading up to late October when the election takes place.
Well, the one thing that Luke, you brought up is the drugs and the mental health, because let's face it, we've always had homelessness. As someone who's grown up in Toronto, spent the vast majority of my life here, I've always known it. But back in the day, when we were young kids, it was all centered in the downtown, and City Hall, of course, was Nathan Phillips Square, was where a lot of the homeless congregated. But they were always out there. There was these families that were down on their luck, living in their car. You just didn't see it. But the face of it has really, really shown. And it's no doubt the mental health issues, number one, is what you see. But then the drug issue as well, so it's not that hidden little secret anymore.
Absolutely. And it's not even just the locations that's changing as well. It's the actual, like you said, the mental health and the drug changes what the face of homelessness looks like. Like you said, back on the day, people like my father say, it was people down on their luck. It was families. It was people that were probably a little bit older, that maybe if they were struggling with addiction, it was maybe an alcohol addiction, things that were more common back then. You look at some of the homeless now, and of course we'll talk about what it means to advocate for them and support them. But you look at some of the homeless now, and it's people that are out of their minds on drugs. It's people that are young. It's people that sometimes refuse help, or are violent or angry when approached. So it's just a completely different world now when it comes to the homeless. And I think that's something, Mickey, as you said, that you've seen it before. I'm sure you can speak to the fact that, you look at your average homeless person now and your average homeless person, say 20, 30 years ago, they're vastly different.
And the spread of it, and we're not talking just from downtown Toronto that is spread out into the suburbs. We are looking at your smaller towns. Well, Barrie, of course, it's a growing city, but it's got its problems. But you can go into towns like Lindsay, which is about 20,000 people. You see it. Belleville. Belleville had this, I'm going to say, is about a year or so ago, made national headlines when there was about 18 to 20 people OD'd in one night. And so it's not just a big city problem. Here's our thing. What is our solution? I know we as Catholics, we want to look out for your neighbor. That is commandment number one. So are we doing it? I know. Tell me maybe what Father Larry had to say. What Catholics can do.
It's a tricky thing, Mickey, for sure, and it's a balancing act. Father Larry's message was very clear, and it's about us being called to act with compassion, and that starts with the most vulnerable among us, right? He talked about, not just being there in the sense that it looks like we're there, but actually going out and taking actions and taking steps to be there. It's one thing to say that you care for the unhoused, you care for the homeless, and you care for the people with mental health problems and drug addictions, but it's how can we leverage our resources and some of the great services and great Catholic services available in places like Toronto and even up north in Barrie, and how do we get the folks that are down on their luck, that are struggling, access to those? That's the biggest thing for me. Of course, there are a couple ways that sometimes people overshoot it, and I'm sure you have some thoughts on that. But it's a balancing act, right? It's how do we care for our neighbor? How do we also look out for our society at the same time? And I think that's a balancing act that the mayor of Barrie and that Father Larry are sort of juggling with right now. Quinton, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Luke, I've had an opportunity to talk this week to one of the Catholic MPs, Garnet Jennis, and he says with so many of the policies that he's trying to do in the House of Commons is that social justice lens of, personal responsibility and just being, very prudent. I mean, like it's, of course, very good to act with compassion, but there also has to be a very concerted effort to make sure whatever course corrections or moves that we may make in response are able to allow the whole society to flourish. And it's really hard to really unpack that. It's a very difficult issue to really penetrate and understand to make a very lasting change because it is so widespread across the country. So I mean, there is, of course, a great social justice impetus as Catholics to be compassionate. We are loving. We are also encouraged to exercise wisdom at all times. And how do we marry those two together? I mean, that's something that we really have to discern very seriously right now.
Yeah. Well, and also things aren't helped by some poor policies, government policies, and the number one I look at is these safe injection sites, and you just do not help addiction by fostering it, and there's so many that it's the hill they're going to die on. They said, "Oh no, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to help these people." And well, we've seen the numbers that more people are dying of drug overdoses than ever. And these policies are just not helping. So, well, I know that in the future, we are going to be looking at more of this. In fact, I know, Luke, you are working on some of the solutions the St. Mary's are looking at. Maybe you can give a little teaser about what's going on with this will be their second annual symposium about homelessness and such issues. We'll just give us a little bit because we will probably be back at this point next week talking about it again.
For sure. Yes. So St. Mary held their first symposium on housing a bit earlier this year. They're going to be hosting another one on October 6th, and they're inviting everyone out to learn more about what's been going on in Barrie. Of course, it wasn't planned to go along with the news, with the new state of emergency, but now that that's been announced, that's something they're going to be looking into. How do we respond with hope and compassion? I believe Habitat for Humanity and Simcoe Health and Addiction Services are going to be speaking there, as well as Father Larry. And I believe a member of the Barrie Police Force is going to be there. So all about looking into solutions. Where do we go from here? What are some practical ways that we can get away from the pews and out into our streets and help these people?
Well, we wish Father Larry and everyone up at St. Mary's the best of luck in helping to deal with this terrible problem that we're seeing Canada-wide. Well, speaking of poor policies, well, you had an upfront look at one of the poorest policies that Canada has, Quinton, and that is our medical assistance in dying, MAiD. And Cardis, the think tank, has released its latest report on MAiD and how increasingly it is the vulnerable, the disabled, who are at risk of a premature death due to MAiD. Quinton, maybe you can tell us your findings from reading the report.
It has definitely become more and more prevalent that it is the vulnerable groups that are being targeted. I think the big headline statistical finding from this report done by Alexander Rakin, a visiting fellow from the Bioethics Center in Washington, D.C. He found that from 2019 to 2023, at least 42% of all MAiD deaths were of persons who required disability services, including over 1,000 people who required but did not receive these services. And during my conversation with Rebecca Vachon, who is the program director of Cardis Health, she made a very good point that, well, look at the number of people that receive services but still decided to go ahead with MAiD. What does that tell you about the quality of services that they received, that they ended up choosing this medical killing procedure? So, I mean, it's something that it was never supposed to be really geared towards vulnerable groups. At the very beginning, there was a very concerted effort in the decisions that came out in the original 2012 court case in BC, affirmed by the Supreme Court, that looking at other jurisdictions around the world, Netherlands, Oregon, Washington, the state in the US, that it was supposed to be absolutely not supposed to be targeting them at all. It's supposed to be about the reasonable foreseeability of death and terminal illness, but there were just multiple safeguards that were weakened along the way that set the road for this happening.
And the courts didn't help, of course. In Quebec, in particular, a judge threw out the expectation of a reasonably foreseeable death. And basically, it's almost turned it into a Wild West, where, all right, that's opened it up to this many more people who can access MAiD. And of course, we're looking at in March, I believe it's 2027, it's supposed to be opened up to people with mental illness, which has been pushed back. Thankfully, maybe they're taking a second look, but as far as we can see, it's still a go coming in 2027. So in 2015, when MAiD was legalized in Canada, people brought up the slippery slope argument. And of course, every time that's brought up, the people that bring it up are ridiculed. Well, what are we seeing? Here we are. So you guys, a little younger than I am, you probably, it's not something you think about as much as someone of my vintage. But and in fact, when this all came up, I believe you were both still in school. So maybe you guys you've grown up with this in the past 10 years. What are some of your thoughts on medical assisted death?
Yeah, Mickey, not to age myself immediately, but in 2015 I was just actually coming into high school. So I was pretty young when this had all first started storming here in Canada. And actually I
It was
didn't
an
remember
old guy problem then, right?
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't remember too much about it myself. Back during that time, I took the liberty yesterday, knowing we were going to be talking about this, and actually messaged a couple of my buddies and said, do you remember anything about MAiD or medical assistance in dying when we were in high school when this first started kicking off? And I would say the vast majority of them said that they had no idea that it was going on. It was kind of this thing we had heard about, of course, that was taking place uh, in Europe and had been taking place in Europe for a while, but it still hadn't really found its roots here in Canada at that point. Um, and you look at it now, and I don't think there's anyone my age or younger who's not at least somewhat aware of what's going on, maybe not to the extent that we're revealing here. Um, but I think that just goes to show how something so obscure that people even interested in news and in journalism at that time, you know, it wasn't really that big of a deal. We didn't know what we were dealing with at that time. And that goes back to the idea of a slippery slope. And like you said, kind of look where we are now. So I don't know if it was different for Quinton, but at least for me, it was something we weren't even really thinking about back then. And now, unfortunately, it's something not only are we always thinking about, it's something we're increasingly worried about. The fact that someone can have the ability to choose MAiD younger than I was at that time, or the same age that I was at that time when it was first sort of coming here in Canada, is alarming.
Well, I was, like Luke alluded to, taking a postgraduate sports journalism course in Toronto that year in 2016. So my mind was not centered on news. It was about, really breaking into either sports reporting or sports broadcasting. So I really kept my focus on that. And MAiD was, a concept that you would hear in the news, but I didn't really consider what that little acronym actually stands for. And I really become immersed over my 5 years with the Register, getting to talk to a lot of people that have been personally affected, some of the court cases. And, as you alluded to, Mickey, there is an effort to try and permanently stop the expansion. There is a bill C-218 that has been promoted over the summertime, and they're going to try to have a second reading vote of it during the fall session. So we'll see if there could be enough of consensus across different political parties to really try to move this forward into committee, and who knows where it could go from there. But March 17th, 2027 is the date that the clock is really marching towards, because that's when all the guardrails really get removed. That Quebec decision that you alluded to, it was a Quebec decision that said that the reasonable foreseeability of natural death violated equality rights and life, security, and of the person rights. So that was the argument that was used at the time. And now, Alexander Raikin, the guy that wrote this report, he also wrote a big report last year just showing how just in 6 years that the fatality rate for MAiD in Canada represents 3% of all deaths. It took 6 years for Canada to get there, and it took the Netherlands 32. So this Alexander Raikin is doing very important investigative journalism on this file, and he's done it again here.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, I can tell you some of my own friends' experiences, because I've had a few in their end of life stage. Two of them and this were both before 2015, so they didn't have the option of MAiD. They ended up taking their lives. One due to physical pain that no doctor could figure out what the problem was. Obviously, that would have brought some mental issues to him, and then another fellow had some mental issues, and he couldn't take it anymore. And both these guys took their lives, and I can't judge either of them. But then there's my friend Chris, who was dying of cancer, and the doctors kept telling him, well, I don't think we can do any more for you. We've gone as far as we can. Well, Chris was the sort of guy who he would tinker with any little thing he had and to find out how it worked and how to make it better. So, well, Chris wasn't going to let these guys off like so easy. So it's like, get back in there and start doing your job, and keep me going here, fella. Keep the engine running. So in the end, it didn't help, but Chris tried to make it happen, and God bless him for that. And he did everything he could to stay alive. So, well, on that note, we take you to a little less gloomy piece of the news. We go to the Canadian bishops, who will be holding their annual plenary in Montreal, and it begins Monday and runs all week. So I know, Quinton, you did a little story on that. Why don't you tell us what we can expect from the bishops?
We could definitely expect the leadership to look different at the end of the week compared to the start of the week, because there are going to be elections taking place, a new president, a new vice president, and also new co-treasurer secretaries. So it'll be very neat to see who there will be chosen as a new leader, and that individual will speak to the media on Friday, September 26th. So it'll be a good opportunity to hear what his thoughts are about the direction of the Canadian Catholic Church. And they're trying to chart a course going forward on how they could possibly be moral guides when it comes to sorting out the ethics of artificial intelligence. And they've brought in an expert to be a excellent, speaker about, human flourishing and, the possibilities of, being able to navigate this period of uncertainty where the economy and a lot of the systems could be upended. So, I mean, there is a expert coming in from Humanity 2.0, which is a new, very good conglomerate of faith-driven and secular entities that team up to really come up with human flourishing ideas. And I think this is going to be a, very key thing for them to discuss during the meeting. So I'm interested in what maybe Luke thinks about what the bishops could possibly do for artificial intelligence. I mean, what should they do as part of their role here?
Yeah, it's a great question, Quinton. I think there's a lot to take in with that. Again, this is kind of an unprecedented time when we look at artificial intelligence. I think if we go back a bit, this is something that wasn't really on people's radars, say 5 years ago, and definitely not 10 years ago. But it's just interesting to me to see how they navigate it. Is this, I think these people really understand the power of a tool like this. But when you understand the power of a tool like this, you also understand some of the downsides and how it can be used poorly. And we've seen that a lot in the past. So for me, it's going to be interesting to see if there's going to be a way that they can navigate this to their benefit and to their advantage, and to the advantage of the faithful. I think really recently it's been looked at in a harsh light, maybe justifyingly so, when we see, the true power of it and the fact that, it can really do anything. And that leads to a lot of unprecedentedness. I'm not sure if you have similar feelings on that, but the fact that it's a hot button issue and a topic of major concern, I think is something we've been expecting for a while now, but it's interesting to sort of see how it's playing out.
And I think one good thing about Philip Larry coming in is he has written a book called The Essay About the Philosophy Behind the Intelligency of Artificial Intelligence. So he has really examined these questions about the morality of it and That's what we're really trying to parse through here. So I imagine the bishops are going to be not only listening to the speech, but they're going to be having those roundtable sessions, which kind of is the hallmark of these plenary assemblies, those working lunches and the opportunity to bounce ideas off of each other. I mean, it's not something that we're going to really be able to witness, kind of as media members in the public, but I think we're going to hopefully glean a lot of the insights about potential outcomes, potential calls to actions when they speak to us at the end of this week on September 26th.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll see what comes out of it. And I think we'll see the result of it, even if we don't get to see what's happening behind the scenes as faithful. Eventually we're going to see the result of this. So it's good to see that it's going on still.
Well, and of course, the Vatican is all over this as well, and it will be, as will the church as a whole in the future, as they will on all the issues we have discussed this week. So I would like to thank Luke and Quinton for joining us for this latest edition of Registered. And we'd like to thank you for joining us. And a big shout out to EWTN for being the sponsor of this week's episode. So meanwhile, for all your Catholic news, be sure to stay informed by keeping track on us at catholicregister.org. Again, thanks for joining us.